think we're ready to go. But hey, again, thanks for joining. This is Lessons from Learning Leaders, and Katrina Kennedy is today. Katrina, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad to be here, Dwayne.
One thing that I love to hear is people's stories. So how did you get where you're at today? What's your story there?
Well, if I go way back to when I was working as a family support officer for the district attorney's office enforcing child support, imagine me sitting at a table. We were in the middle of a reorganization and we were going to hire a bunch of new staff. And my manager stopped behind my chair and said, "Katrina, you can talk." And I became a trainer. And that was a long time ago now, a few decades. And I could do more than talk. I discovered that I absolutely loved learning and development. A few years after that moment, I went out on my own and have been out on my own as a trainer and facilitator and consultant for about 28 years. And my absolute passion and what I spend most of my time doing is helping subject matter experts and new trainers learn how to both design and facilitate learning experiences. So I get to see a lot of people develop. I've seen a lot of people come into organizations as trainers and then move into leader positions and been able to maintain those relationships with them. It's exciting to see them grow, exciting to have that touch with their own success.
So I'm curious. You weren't in a position where you were training people, and it wasn't something that you had actually designed to go be a part of. So how long did it take you, do you think, to go from being where you were to recognizing that there was more to training than just telling? Because I think of my own journey, and when someone said to me, "Hey, we need you to go do training," and I thought to myself, how lucky these people are to have me come in and bestow all of my wisdom upon them. I'm now going to tell them everything I know, and they are simply empty vessels for me to pour my knowledge into. How long do you think, and maybe, of course, that's not as arrogant as I actually was, but the mindset being that I'm here to tell you everything that you need to know. How long do you think it took to go from that mindset to actually learning the best practices of learning and development, understanding the adult learning theories, and how to go from being the sage on the stage, so to speak, to being that facilitator style guide by the side?
That's a great question, and I think there are kind of two parts of it. There's the part that I when I really discovered learning theory and that there was more to just standing. But there was the first piece where I was with people, new employees, for 4 weeks. We had this 4 week long training. I have no idea why it was 4 weeks. That's just what it was. And it's a lot of time to be in the same space with people. And and so I knew we needed to do things other than just have them listen. They were learning complex codes, calculations, and this was at a time when they did not have a computer system to do those calculations. So it just made sense to me that they would do the work that we wanted them to do, and that we would, I would add reflection, we would add activities, we would just, spice up those 4 weeks that they were all in the same room, with no windows. And it was probably, if I really think about it, it was probably about 7 years into the work that I was doing that I came across the book Telling Ain't Training and opened it up and went,
Great book.
"Oh, yeah," and that like a classic. It's still on my shelf. I still refer to it. And as I went through it, I realized like, oh, well, that's why that activity worked. And like, oh, that thing I was doing, there was something behind it. So that was one moment and or second moment. And then the really big one, I was at a conference and I was doing like probably a 40-minute session. I don't even remember what it was on. And the people were up and they were talking to each other. And there was something about the way they were interacting with each other. It was like this literal light bulb moment that I realized, like, oh, this is about them. And that
Love
yeah,
it.
right, and then it changed everything for me. Like, it wasn't like, I hadn't been conceited or like, "Oh, it's all me, you need to listen to me," just like, you described, for yourself, but it was just absolute shift in how I went about my work, both in how I designed it with them in mind, and then how I delivered it. It was a really monumental moment.
I love that you said that because I love moments that reinforce that I'm actually doing something right. Because I don't know if it's every trainer, but I know for a lot of the time myself, I'm like, am I even doing this right? There's a like an insecurity, like I don't know if I'm doing this the way I should. And to hear one thing that I used to when I do training for trainers, I would say, look, the number one rule, if you forget everything else in here, I want you to walk out of here remembering that the number one rule is it's not about you. It's about them. And so when you said, "Oh, it's about them," I was like, "Thank you. I'm doing something right myself." So it's nice to hear that. And it isn't about us. And so many trainers I see that do that. And I would imagine with what you do working with SMEs that you see that a lot too.
Absolutely. Most subject matter experts want to just give everything and they do it from this really kind place. But it's really delightful when they understand the learning science. They understand why they shouldn't give everything. I think about some engineers that I've had the opportunity to work with. And once they kind of have the formula for learning, then they're like, oh, okay. And not only does it change how they approach the information, the content they want to provide, it also gives them comfort in front of the room or in front of the camera, whatever it might be, when they realize, like, oh, it's not about me. So not all the focus has to be on me. In fact, if I switch the focus to who my participants, then I'm much calmer and much more together, and I'm not gonna make mistakes in the same way because they're not reliant entirely on what I am saying and doing. It's really kind of a cool moment to free them of all of the nervousness that they often have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real thing that never it's a weight. It really is a weight to be like, "I have to perform for the next 30 minutes." And when you talk to someone and say, "No, you don't. No, you don't. You need to rec" and I'm not sure how you feel about this, but this is what I've talked to my colleagues about. I'm like, "Look, very often, like 70% of what you're about to train, the people in the room already know. But it might be that this person knows 3%, this person knows 5%, this person might know 15%. And it's your job as a facilitator to pull all that information out of them so that at the end you can fill in that 30% that they might not know in the room, but you want them leaving with how impressed they are with themselves, not with how impressed they are. And when you can do that, you're doing your job right because when they discover it, wow, it means more since I came up with it. I'm so smart, look at that. But it can't be just a transfer of information because that's not gonna make a difference on the job site. And that's what we wanna talk about in a bit is making that transfer. Before we get to that, you just published a book not that long ago. Am I wrong there? Learning that lasts?
Yeah, I just a few weeks ago published Learning That Lasts. It is reflection activities for trainers and designers. And it is very much a how to reference guide so that you can think about the outcome that you want from an objective or an activity in the learning experience, and then go to that outcome chapter. And there are between 4 to 7 activities that you can easily grab and put into your design. And the ultimate goal is that they help learning transfer.
So tell me about the process of what that was like to write that. Was it something that you'd thought about doing for quite some time, or something you never even considered and someone said, "Hey, Katrina, you ought to write a book."
Well, okay, so 3rd grade Katrina really wanted to write a book. Like, I wanted to be an author, like, that was the goal. And as life happened, I wrote 3 books. I left them on my shelf or on my hard drive, didn't do anything with them, didn't really know how to do anything with them. And then, asked my son a couple of years ago. We were having a conversation, and he said, "Mom, what did you wanna be when you grew up?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to be a writer." And he looked at me in his, I think he was 18 at the time, and, as 18-year-olds can be, he's like, "Well, why don't you do that?" In his very snotty way. And I walked away and realized, like, well, why don't I? And so I reached out to ATD Press, and I actually gave them one of the books that I had written, and they very kindly laughed and said, "No, this is like your entire brain in a book. Like, this is too much." Um, but but there's something there. And so we went our separate ways, and we both, were brainstorming, and through literally a LinkedIn post by Carl Kopp, he was talking about wisdom and reflection, and I made a comment about reflection, and Jack Harlow, who I'd been working with at ATD, reached out and he said, "This is your topic. This is your book." And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely right. And the from that moment, it was really February to October to write the book, because it was like the book that needed to be written. So the reflection activities are all activities that I've used. They're all activities that have research behind them. They're all activities that you could pick up and do today. And I have seen them help transfer learning to the workplace. So I know they work.
So you wrote a book in about 8 months, if my math is correct, is that right?
I wrote a book in 8 months. Yeah. Now, granted, from October
Can we get
until
you in touch with
May.
George R. R. Martin? That's what I wanna know.
Yeah. Well, his writing's a little different than mine. So
I'm just saying. How long have we been waiting for this last book? And you're like, "I'll do it
no
in 8
kidding.
months." We could just
No
get you
kidding.
alone with him for a few months. He could knock out the next book, and we could know what happens. Because this is getting silly,
Right.
but,
That's
sorry.
right.
Wow, so that's very impressive, 8 months to, from the idea to getting it all out there. That's impressive. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, we have to add on that there was October to May of editing and editing and more editing, and that was hard. That was a harder time than writing it, actually. The editing was a little treacherous, but we made it through. We made it through, and I'm proud of what I've ended up with.
Well, congratulations. That's impressive, and I know, the editing process can be brutal. You survived that as well, and here we are today. And I wanna get to your session at, Training Mag Conference and Expo, because this is something transfer is something that I think is it for me, it was a new concept when I well, every concept's a new concept when you first hear about it, so that's a silly statement for me to say, but the idea of transfer was I think groundbreaking for me when I first thought about it, because I would do all this training And then I would sit back and I'd be like, I don't know why they're not using it. And when I think it may have been in the 6, disciplines of breakthrough learning. I think it was in there, or it might have been Bob Pike. It might have been Bob Pike explaining to me that transfer is where your training fails, because you can spend all this time in the classroom, but if you don't have a transfer strategy, then you've wasted everyone's time. And it may have been, I think Bob first introduced me to it, but it may have been 6 disciplines that explained to me the reason it fails is because very often the trainer, when they're done, they wipe their hands. They're like, okay, I'm done. I've trained them. It's not my problem anymore. They've got it. And the manager's like, well, they've been trained. I don't need to do anything. And then there's never any plan to actually implement the training to transfer it from the classroom to the field. And so this is something that I have preached for a long time, in that if you are not, as the trainer, if if you're not taking responsibility for the transfer, you're setting yourself up to be transferred to another job. Because when it fails, there's not a manager in this place that's going to say, "Oh yeah, that's my fault. I should have done something." They're all going to look at the trainer and say, "Why didn't the training work?" And I think that's really that's one of the 2 reasons that transfer is so important. First, the first reason is your job is to improve performance. And if it's not transferred to the field, you failed. If it failed, point 2, you're now out of a job. And I think that's 2 reasons why transfer is profoundly important. And so why I wanted to talk to you about your session. I've talked enough. I'm going to turn
Yeah.
things over to you now.
Well, you've hit on really important pieces, and we can go back to before we even train, that if we haven't done a good job of actually selecting the activities and even like selecting training as the intervention, we're setting ourselves up that we've got to have, transfer starts with making sure that we've aligned it to what's actually happening in the organization. And once we've aligned it with what's actually happening and we get the manager on board and we get our participants on board, then the hard work of making sure that people are able to retrieve what we have talked about. They're able to take the time to reflect so that they can actually, leave with it. So often we give so much content that we forget to have the time for people to practice. We don't give them the feedback about their practice. And then we definitely leave reflection to this afterthought. No, I can't even tell you the number of times I've witnessed and been guilty of this myself, that you go through all your content, you go through maybe some great activities, and then that reflection that you wanted to have, you realize like, oh, we ran out of time. So we're not going to do the reflection. And then we kick him out of the room. And like you said, we don't follow up as a facilitator after. We don't check in. We don't have the supportive nudges that people need. Maybe we haven't set them up with an accountability partner. So we just, we kind of take the training wheels off, if you will, and push them out the door, and whatever happens happens. But that support, the training wheels, if you will, needs to happen, like you've said, like beyond just the training experience, just beyond the room that they're in.
Yeah, so often I think about that transfer process failing or not being executed correctly, because so often trainers don't close a training. They just run out of time.
Hmm.
Right? And so the
Right.
things that they wanted to do that would have helped with that transfer, they can't, because like you said earlier, they try to pack so much in there. And that goes back to that old mental model that training is about the transfer of information, and that if they just have the information, they can execute. And that's a mental model that I think so many trainers come into this field with, and that's something hard to shake. So, do any of your techniques help them shake that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think I shake it best with a story that helps people put it into perspective. And if you're squeamish, this story might be uncomfortable. My husband can't listen to it. He's like, but that's his. So there's the warning. But I ask really simply, if you're going to go have blood drawn, do you want the phlebotomist to have a lot of content knowledge, a lot of, they got a lot of information, or did you want them to have practiced and really thought about what they're doing? And, most reasonable people will say they want the practice. And so if we take that idea of the phlebotomist and we put that into anything else we're doing, it would then make sense to give people the time to practice, give people the time to think about it. And we could continue this analogy. We can continue these stories if we think about, Olympic level athletes. They practice, they have a coach, they have support, and they reflect on their performance. They visualize. So they do those things to achieve a level of performance. And for some reason, when we go into the workplace, we we forget that that same technique can work for the work we're doing in the workplace, no matter what that work may look like.
That's a I love the example from someone who donated a lot of plasma while they were in college. I know the desire for someone who can stick you once and be done. The person when 2 people would walk up, I'd be like, "This is gonna be a bad time right here." They're training someone new, and,
On me.
that is never how many times is this gonna take? "Oh, we're gonna try something new." No, please don't. Please don't. I'll just leave. You can practice on someone else. I'm done.
Exactly.
It's a
Go grab the orange. Like,
very yeah, it's an intimate experience for me. Having been there, having been that training pincushion, I understand. You just read the book today, great, I don't care. I know what you're about to do to me. This is not going to be fun for either one of us. Very, very prescient.
right.
That's great. Tell me about this. You say that these are re You we talk about and I what I've come to learn is Training Magazine is the one that names your sessions. These are not your sessions, right? Or your titles, but it says they're researched back. Is this neuroscience you're dealing with, or is this experience, that you've done?
It's a little bit of all of the above. So I like to rely on things that I know that I have seen in the training space that work. Some of it is absolutely drawn from neuroscience, and then some of it is drawn from research that that have been done that's been done in a variety of settings. Um, I like research that is not just the college students that, show up and get paid a little bit to be in part of that study, although there is some of that. So it's really, we're really bringing together, ideally, like the best of what is out there for learning. So it's not just me, I didn't go to altitude at a high mountain and decide these are the 6 things. Really pulling them from experience and research.
I'm just picturing you visiting some oracle of ATD somewhere. Like, "I need 6. Here are your 6,
Only
Katrina."
6.
That's not how it works. Not how it works. Well, listen, you said you've been doing this 28 years, you've been on your own. If someone wants to work with you and they want to benefit from your experience, how can they get a hold of you?
So they can connect with me on LinkedIn, and they can also go to katrinakennedy.com and connect with me there, and happy to talk about the different services I can provide.
Well, this has been a great conversation and really is I think we need to really talk about transfer more. We talk about instructional design, we talk about a lot, cognitive overload, that sort of thing. You could have the prettiest slides, you could have a great flow, you could have perfect content. If you slack on transfer, you failed, I think. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate you putting the focus on this. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And again, if you're going to Training Magazine Conference and Expo, and Training Magazine is not a sponsor of this, I just really love the conference and expo. I am open to them being a sponsor if you're listening out there. I'm just saying, I got kids, I got to eat. But I really want people to go and find the best stuff that's there. So this was one of those. When I saw it, I was like, people need to learn more about transfer, because I've seen this. I sadly have seen friends of mine who no longer have jobs because the people who were in charge neglected transfer. And there's a lot they neglected, but if you cannot show that you're worth the money that they're spending on you, you're going to find yourself in a hard spot. And transfer is key to that. You've got to be able to show that what you're doing is improving performance, because that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Katrina, I want to thank you one last time for being here. I'm going to link to your book in the show notes and to your website. So thanks again for doing this. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.